And credible is essentially an acronym. Now, let me share this my screen again with you guys, with all of you here. Here you go. Now, this is from an art essay, this a set of art things that I'm still working on. It's available, the draft is available on academia. It's called Credible Research and Positive Discourse Analysis. Let me sort of walk you through some of this stuff. So essentially, credible is an acronym. And you can think, notice I've said credible project or research. Essentially, in terms of project, it's applicable and relevant to educational sort of contexts. So essentially thinking about it in terms of how do we create, instead of thinking of the syllabus in terms of topics and grammatical points, you think about it in terms of what do you activities and what goals do you want the students to achieve. And the grammar and the readings and everything else sort of fits into it, because the literacy becomes a tool. Literacy is no longer a goal. So when literacy becomes a tool, what you're teaching your students to do is to be able to learn, is to learn how to find the right knowledge, find the right resources, and use those resources in order to achieve their goals. If they have this skill and if they have this ability, then they can find the knowledge for anything that they're trying to do. And that ability is what's going to help them. Why? Because nobody can have all the knowledge, right? So skills and abilities take you much further than trying to chase an infinite goal. So credible projects are thinking in terms about locally embedded projects, which are contextually relevant. So they're locally oriented. They respond to practical needs. They're not driven by gaps or theory. It engages the stakeholders. So we're not just collecting data, right? It's not like you've got research participants or survey participants. No, how can you actually create knowledge or create change if all you're doing is collecting data from people who are not really even interested in what you're doing and may not even interpret the questions in the way you're asking them. It's useless, that all that lit research that we produce. And that's why you don't see any application of the research we are doing in your communities, right? Imagine all the PhDs and all the people who are being educated in our schools and colleges and universities in our countries and regions, all of the thousands and hundreds and thousands of graduates. Notice nothing changes on the ground. All these PhDs are writing papers and publishing and writing books and doing all these things, and yet nothing changes. So notice, are we spending so many human hours and resources but achieving nothing? That's what we need to change, right? So if we change our ways to doing education, we can change the way that people engage with knowledge and what people do with knowledge and how people use education. Now, credible is one way of doing it. Why? Because we're engaging as stakeholders. We're not just using them as data sources. And in doing this, we're drawing on understandings of both local knowledge and practices. Very important. We need to understand the local. And at the same time, we need to be informed by diverse approaches and experiences. Notice this is not just Western. We want to learn from each other, not just the West. In fact, in many ways, what happens in the West is totally irrelevant to us. Pakistan and Philippines and Bangladesh are more similar to each other than any of these countries is to Australia or to the US. There's just huge differences between them and us, and there are many more similarities between each other. So we need to learn from each other, and especially look at good scenarios, look at good examples, look at success stories from wherever they are. Why? Because success stories tell us why certain things can work or how certain things can work in certain sort of situations. And we want to learn from that because we want to apply that learning in our own contexts. And I'll talk about this again in a second. Now, doing all of this, why are we doing all of it? Because we want to benefit local communities. Because without benefit, there is little credibility of a project. Why are we doing it if it's not going to benefit the community? And it's not going to harm anybody else. Very important. Do not harm anybody or anything else. It doesn't matter if it's living things or non-living things. You have to be environmentally conscious, because remember, our elders and our ancestors were environmentally ethical. They were environmentally responsible. They did not harm nature. They did not harm other living and non-living things just because they could. And we need to remember that and take that heritage and our inheritance very seriously, because as we develop this work, we need to remember we want to benefit our communities and make sure we're not harming anybody. And this is especially the case in any work that we do towards decolonizing education, because as I will talk again, one of the key things and the key requirements in this work is what we call imandari, honesty, integrity, right? And it's also relates to ethics. So as you know, imandari is crucial in the work we do, and in imandari can only happen if we are trying to bring benefits to people and we are not harming anybody. And remember, imandari, the notion of imandari means that you don't harm anybody else, absolutely no harm to others, right? So, and it doesn't matter who the other is. So it doesn't matter if the other is X religion or Y religion or A race or B race or this ethnicity or that ethnicity, or speaks this language or that language, or has this accent or that accent, or has speaks acts like this or that, and drinks this or that, or eats this and that. It makes absolutely no difference, because if you mistreat that person, whoever that person is, you're actually breaking your own imandari. And if you break your imandari, it's your imandari that is broken, right? And therefore, it's your ethical position that is compromised. It's your integrity that is compromised. So if you keep that in mind, if you keep your integrity and imandari as in mind, then essentially questions of discrimination disappear, because you cannot discriminate, because discrimination means and implies unethical behavior on your own part, which means any sectarian, religious, language-based, race-based, any kind of discrimination is essentially unethical, and because it violates the principle of imandari. And that's very important for us to remember. And that's really what I mean by ethical. And you know what? If you're going to do all this and you're going to bring benefit to a local community in your context, addressing a need in your community, guess what? You're the only one doing it, right? And so, in a sense, by doing that practice and creating that practice, you're creating another positive example so that others can learn from your work, and they can also do it in their own context. And that's really what Credible is all about.